So slavery in the United States at this point of right after the Revolution. Of course, it still exists in the southern economy. That's not going to change. But up north, you do begin to have more of a struggle with coming to terms with the role of slavery in our society. This is particularly true in New England, and even in some of these middle colonies like New York. And so, how do you come to terms with this idea of republicanism, of people having a say in their government? And so, you begin to see that places up north begin to kind of ease and decrease slavery laws, eventually, kind of allowing current slaves to eventually be free when they reach a certain age, and new African Americans were entitled to freedom. And they're not. It's not that there's the profound sense of egalitarianism. It's really more that they have property requirements for voting, and they know that former slaves are not likely to have property, and so they're not super concerned about that part of it. You do start to see that places like Virginia and Maryland begin to ease the manumission laws. Manumission means kind of this idea of setting people free, granting them their freedom, and they begin to prohibit slaves from coming in. Remember, we don't have the Constitution yet, so we haven't had the Great Compromise that outlaws international slave trading in 1807. So this is something that's being done at the state level. And remember, Jefferson, for all that he writes this Declaration of Independence, his conflicts over how to reconcile slavery with, all men are created equal is really based on kind of this state idea. And so Virginia is going to begin to ease that importation of slavery, but they don't totally get away with it, right? And a lot of this has to do with the fact that the middle colonies are less and less depending upon, cash crops. It's mostly grains and that sort of thing. And so you have kind of this transition happening, at least until you get to the cotton gin. And when the cotton gin comes in and cotton takes off in the deep south and the western part of the southwest rather, what you're going to see is that slavery kind of roars back. But you have this kind of sweet spot, and I say sweet spot loosely, and from 1780 to roughly about 1800, where slavery is kind of starting to slow down, it's starting to wither a little bit. And so this is the context for when we create the Constitution. And I want you to remember that, because it can get it's very easy for us to take what we know about history and look back at 1787 and say, oh, well, how could they do this? Understand that in 1787, what they're seeing is a trend towards slavery to declining. And that's kind of the assumption that they're having at this point. Economically speaking, you're talking about that with the Treaty of Paris, since that creates such favorable terms with Great Britain, and since there's a treaty of alliance and friendship with France, you have all these products suddenly coming in. Remember, you'd had roughly 10, 12 years, where boycotts, and then we were at war, and those things basically allowed for kind of early manufacturing, early artisans to really kind of create a niche. Except here comes this flood of cheap goods, well-made goods coming into the country. You have some states that are extremely impoverished in this period, really struggling economically. And you have some individuals that are hoping that they can reclaim their continental dollars and get some money. People that have been kind of, speculating on land purchases. That's going to drive kind of this high inflated economy where there's lots of money being printed. Remember, Congress is printing, states are printing. We have way too much money in the economy, and that's going to create this inflation, as well as creating kind of this overabundance of products that are going to hurt manufacturing. So the economy is really kind of in a crisis, which is one of the misunderstandings that people had during the American Revolution, and you see it after the French and Indian War too. It's really not until you get to World War II that we understand that at the end of a conflict, you have to really transition the economy back to a peacetime system. Otherwise, you risk having some kind of recession or crisis. So the economy is struggling, and that's an important thing to understand because it's the struggling economy that's going to precipitate Shays' Rebellion. So you have some states that have done okay, that managed funds pretty well, don't have a ton of debt from the war, and they don't want, they want to stop this printing of money. They want to go back to a more stable economy. Hyperinflation creates a very unstable economy, and if you're doing okay, if you have, actual things with value, whether it's gold or whether it's land, you don't want an inflated paper currency. Western farmers, however, the ones that are engaged in speculation, they do want paper money because paper money makes it easier to borrow, it makes it easier to pay for stuff, and so they want more of that. Artisans and manufacturers want for prices to be regulated. They want some control over imports and that kind of thing. And some of them, if you have a very heavy manufacturing state, they might try to regulate imports coming in. But is that going to do any good if you have other states that have basically an open door? So if you're South Carolina and you import everything, you're going to encourage everybody to send stuff to you. Well, it's not going to take, it might take a couple months, but eventually those products will make their way up to New York and still affect those economies, even though New York State might have a different set of procedures as far as foreign trade. You're going to see the same thing happening with the paper money. And so the state legislatures are going to be the place where these kind of merchant interests are going to fight it out with the farmer interests. And remember, you've got state legislatures that are dominated by kind of these middle-class people that are often farmers from the West or merchants from the East. And that's going to begin to make the state legislatures really kind of unwieldy and make them very ineffective. And of course, the Congress can't do anything, right? They can't tax, they can't control trade, they can't do that. So Shays' Rebellion is one of your kind of best examples, if you will. And I'll probably share a video that goes into a little more detail about this. But Shays' Rebellion is essentially, and it's actually Pennsylvania, not Massachusetts. No, I'm sorry, it is Massachusetts. Pennsylvania is the Whiskey Rebellion. Sorry, wrong rebellion. And yes, we have rebellions in the United States after we've had our own rebellion. So by 1787, you have Western Massachusetts. A lot of these guys that had gone off to fight in the military have come back, and they're trying to get back to farming their land. They have taxes to pay and that kind of thing. Except what they have are these continental dollars, right? So Daniel Shay is a Western Massachusetts farmer who's severely in debt. Okay, and this was true of many Western farmers. And so basically they begin to march on the Massachusetts legislature because they want relief. They want economic relief. They want this Massachusetts legislature. And some of this has to do with people speculating on buying up these continentals and holding on to them and then kind of selling them back to the government at hoping that they'll be redeemed at a higher rate. You've got people that are struggling with high taxes. Massachusetts had an incredible debt load. Remember, Massachusetts had been hit particularly hard by the actions of Great Britain, and Great Britain had shut down the harbor. So they have a huge debt they've got to pay back. So they've got high taxes. These farmers can't afford to pay their taxes. They've got these worthless continental dollars. They march on the legislature. They essentially shut it down. And they close down the county courts. They stop letting foreclosures happen. And basically kind of go marching around, creating havoc in Massachusetts. And and what's funny here is that Sam Adams, the leader of the Sons of Liberty, is one of the guys in the Massachusetts legislature that's like, oh, I can't believe these crazy rebels. What are they doing, right? And so what it's gonna take is for basically the 1787 rebellion to get put down. These guys get arrested. And so Daniel Shea and the others will eventually, most of them will be released eventually, though most people won't really hold it against them. But understand that it creates a great deal of anxiety. Now, it's not just Shea's rebellion. There's also other examples of problems. You've got problems with Spanish Florida happening in Georgia. You've got problems in other places with people demanding back pay and people demanding money. So you've got a lot of problems going on with the Articles of Confederation because basically, these are ordinary, respectable people, and they've got to keep the peace. If they don't start doing that, then the country's going to fall apart. And so this is how you're going to end up with 5 states, including Virginia, making a call for a constitutional convention. And so they're going to call for a revision of the Articles of Confederation. So again, think in terms of Shea's rebellion. Is it really any different, right? They've got a government that they don't think understands their concerns. They've got a government that is giving them high taxes. They've got a government that they feel like they fought for that is not paying attention to their interests. So I think it's very interesting that we have a revolution, we have our own country, and almost immediately the act of being a government becomes a problem, right? And so this idea that sometimes we get unhappy with what our government does is a part of the issue. And can we have revolution? Jefferson, of course, will famously say about Daniel Shea that a little revolution every now and then is a good thing. But for most people, they see revolution as being very disturbing, as being something that creates discord for people. And so you want to be sure that you kind of understand some of the problems with Daniel Shea. So I'm going to stop